Hey, so this week's lab is data literacy. So we are still using Excel, but whereas the last lab was more about like first kind of crash course with Excel, this one is focused more about what we're doing with Excel. So what are we doing with the data? And you can think about that DIKW model, the pyramid, where at the bottom we have the raw facts and figures. And what we are actually going to be doing is we're going to be analyzing those. Excuse me, those raw facts and figures so that we can understand our data. So we're going to be taking those, we're going to be creating information by doing things like, well, maybe adding some context and then using charts to find trends in the data. And then we are not only going to do that, we're going to make inferences about what those trends tell us. And then we're going to communicate those inferences. So that's kind of stepping through the D, the I, and the K, the knowledge creation and sharing bit of it. It's those three steps of the pyramid. So think about that as a reference for what we're actually doing today. So let me make sure my screen is up. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So you're going to go to your lab. We're going to go to content and find the data literacy lab. Let's open those instructions first of all. And now for this lab, we're going to be working with this data set only, Kendrick singles features. So over here on my left, I just opened another file window and I navigated to the folder I've created in my ETSU OneDrive for keeping all my lab files organized. So I made this data literacy folder, and that's where I'm going to drag this over to put a copy of it in there. Before I open this in Excel, I'm going to show you what happens if I open this with Notepad. So this is the raw text form of our data set. And you can see that these are column names. They're all separated by commas. And then we start every new line, every row, by hitting the enter key to break onto a new line. Like this is text wrapped. If I actually zoom out, you can see that where each new row starts. And so this format is a very just simple primitive way of storing a spreadsheet called comma separated values. Every value is separated by a comma, and then every new row is separated by a new line. Easy peasy, simple data structure to work with. The problem is that it doesn't store things like calculations, fancy table formatting, or cell formatting, text formatting, or charts. And so what I see sometimes is people will get started. They'll go through this whole project. They'll do formulas, they'll create charts and everything. They go to File, Save, and they think everything's saved when they close it. And then when they open it again, none of that's there. Only this is there. Only the raw data, right? And that's because CSV can't save that kind of stuff. So we have to first, before we get started, we have to go to File, Save As. I'm going to click Browse, make sure I'm in the right folder, which I am. So we've got this file, we opened it, saved it as a workbook, done. Now, what we're going to do to start with is we're going to we're going to investigate a little bit. What is energy? What is valence? So what we need to do to start is actually analyze our data a little bit. So I'm going to actually just start with Google. Explanation of Spotify metrics. I'm going to search some of them to see if that narrows it down. Instrumental. What is liveness? Liveness. Speechiness. Okay, and this is the source I was looking for. But so I like to actually find the links that Google Gemini uses just so I can kind of go straight to the source. And this one does a really good job of explaining what we're seeing here. So instrumentalness predicts whether a track contains no vocals. Okay, so high instrumentalness, like a 1.0, means there's probably like no vocals present. So I assume they probably use AI to kind of detect whether they think there are vocals or not. And so they're representing this on like a confidence from 0 to 1. Energy, perceptual measure of intensity and activity. Okay, so if something feels energetic, it's fast, it's got a high tempo, and it's noisy, as opposed to just the tempo alone. So it's a more nuanced way of measuring how energetic the song feels. And then look, we even have a danceability. How danceable is this based on tempo, rhythm, stability? Can't have the rhythm changing too much, I guess. Beat strength. You want a strong beat, yeah. Okay, so cool. Now we kind of understand our data more. Oh, and this one. So how vocally laden is this track, right? Oh, and specifically this is about spoken word. All right, so now we're going to create 2 derived columns, meaning these are new columns derived from our existing data, and they're intended that they should be used to help us make our charts. So you're welcome to follow along and use the 2 that I use, or you can find something else that you want to use in your charts. But try to make use of each of the new columns that you create in one of your charts. So we're going to be creating 3 different charts to analyze different trends that we're finding in this to make sense of all this data that we have. And so that's kind of what we're doing here. So let's look at the first one, converting the date, just getting the year from it. Why? I figured that would be less granular so we can focus on like overall year-to-year trends as opposed to like month-to-month or something like that. A little bit easier for the x-axis on our charts. So I'm going to select column F here, and I'm going to say insert, and I'm going to name this release year instead of release date. And then I'm going to use this text formula. So if I type equals text, you can see I kind of get a little bit about it. And there's a little bit of context for you right here. But if you're like, I need a little bit more guidance, where can you turn? Well, number one, if we go through the formulas tab, and then try to insert from our library of functions. I'm not sure you get all these categories on the Mac version, but I know you have like an overall place you can select all the functions from a big list. But it's in lookup and reference in this function library up here. But if I click it through here, I get a dialog window. And I think this actually appears like on the right-hand side on a Mac, if I'm not mistaken. But now it's more clear how I structure this formula. So I type formulas that I'm familiar with. I just straight up like type them. I don't pull this up. But when I don't exactly remember what goes where in the formula, I use these to help me kind of build my formulas. So for value, this is where I'm going to put the initial value I want to work with. This is E2. It's the cell reference of the first date. And then I'm going to say Y to get the year, just like that. And now if you're like, how did I know that? I know that Y formats as a year because I've done it before. These codes, you don't want to memorize them. And so when you're not sure exactly how to get what you want, that's a good opportunity to go and see if you can search through some documentation and find your answer. So if I do a quick search, you can see I'll get some good examples on Microsoft's webpage here. But if I'm still not sure how to do exactly what I'm trying to do, this is actually a good opportunity to use something like ChatGPT or Google Gemini. Generative AI is a very flawed tool, and it uses a lot of resources. So I don't just recommend using it willy-nilly for everything you do. But what's really helpful about AI is how you can sort of use it as a tutor. And with websites that have good documentation, and especially when it's like popular software, popular programming languages like Python and so on, then those AI are typically, they're going to be able to give pretty good answers where they have had probably web pages like this embedded in their corpus of knowledge when they were trained. And so they're probably going to be able to give you some pretty good help as long as you're very descriptive of what you're trying to do. Sometimes even when you're not very descriptive, you get lucky. Now, of course, documentation gets out of date, things change, but that's another thing that I found is really helpful just as of late. When I don't remember how to do something, sometimes asking ChatGPT is a little bit quicker than finding the documentation. It's not always better, but sometimes it's just as good, if not. So now I got my dates, and remember to autocomplete, we move our cursor down to the bottom right corner, and then we get a crosshair, and that means that we're ready to pull the trigger. To go with that analogy. So there we go. We got all of our years populated. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do something that you might remember from Python. If, else. And what I want to do is I looked at this popularity score over here, and I said, okay, clearly, and I really don't know why they did this. These are all decimal notation, and then they just went to whole numbers for that. I would rather just have this as a percentage too, just so they're all, or a decimal too, so they're all uniform. Like I know how to get a percent out of these. But anyway, they're inconsistent. So this one's whole numbers, but I can tell it goes from 0 to 100, right? And so me looking at that, I think, it'd be nice maybe instead of the exact category, if I did a pie chart, maybe it'd be nice to have let's kind of bend these into 3 categories by the numeric ranges. And so that's what this if statement is targeting. And now so my popularity is in column I. If you don't insert a new column like I did, then you would have to adapt this formula to target column H rather than I, right? So think through what you're getting. If you're getting high for everything, that's because it's the last condition. But I'll kind of show you a cool example of how you can get a lot of help with today's AI tools. And this is because when I give you quizzes, I do want you to remember the essentials. I want you to remember what are the things that we can do on the home tab? We can format numbers on the home tab. I want you to remember basic concepts associated with what we're learning. What I don't want you to memorize is exactly how to make a complicated if formula in Excel, because when are you ever going to need that in the real world? You don't. I code all the time. I don't remember everything about how to code, how to do everything with every library I use. I look it up as I need it. So let's practice doing that together with this problem. So I've pre-written this out just to save time, but let's read through this. I have a column called popularity over here that ranges from 0 to 100, or maybe specifically that has values that can range from 0 to 100. I want to create a new popularity category column that applies the category low for a value in this range, medium for this range, high for that range. And look, I'm being very explicit about what I want. And then I'm going to tell ChatGPT, I'm bad at writing Excel if conditions. Can you help me construct a formula to do this? And let's see. See what happens. Okay, so it says, assuming the popularity value is in cell A2. Well, mine's not. I got track ID in A2. So what I like is, look, it even explains to us so we can actually learn what's going on to construct these in the future. And we see that what we actually have is we're nesting an if condition or an if formula inside of the if formula. That's something you can do in Excel. And you can nest it as many levels deep as you need to. And so what it's doing is first the outer formula. It's checking if this first condition matches. If it does, it's going to print low in the cell. Then what the Excel formula requires is that you do something as an else. And so if you're doing a binary, you could just do low or high, and instead of dot, 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 you write high in quotes there, and it would just print low or high. But what I'm doing is embedding a second if function as that first else condition and saying, okay, if that wasn't true, it's not low, then check if this is true. And if it is, say medium. And then else, if it's not, say high. Okay? So, and I'm not joking when I wrote that part. I'm bad at writing these in Excel. I can write these in Python all day. When I look at this, I'm like, oh God. And seeing it now, I'm like, oh yeah, I could construct that, but it's not intuitive to me. And if it is to you, congratulations. So let's go over and I'm going to create a new column here. Insert, and I'm going to call this popularity category. And let's see if our formula, our ChatGPT formula works. So I paste it in, I get high, and that checks out. It checked that, it said nope, checked that, it said no, so it gave us high. Now let's copy this all the way down, and wait a second. I know 0 is not high. 34, this should be low, right? What is medium is less than or equal to 66. So this should be medium, not high. What's going on? Well, wait a second. This is where, you have to use your brain. You can't just copy and paste. And ChatGPT told us its assumption, assuming that popularity is in column A, and it's not. And so it's evaluating the high because that's the else condition, meaning it's always choosing that because none of those first two aren't true. So all we need to do is adjust it to match our column. So that's I in my case. So we'll change A2 to I2. Hit enter. And then I'm going to copy this down again. And now we see a change. And now this is looking good. So we're in business. And notice that this generated almost the same function. The difference is mine says A2 is less than 65 in the instructions, and then A2 is less than 32 there. Or 34, I mean. And that said less than 67. So actually, because we're dealing with whole numbers, integers, and I guess that's why this was represented like this instead of a decimal. Because we're working with whole numbers, then these formulas work exactly the same, mine versus ChatGPT's. We didn't tell ChatGPT they were whole numbers, so it went ahead and to make sure it was always right, it did less than or equal to 33 and 66 there. So cool. Now we have that. And now let's make some charts. So to make a pivot chart on Macs, I realized now from what students have told me, and because I'm a fairly new MacBook user, I honestly didn't know this. On Macs, you have to first create a pivot table, and then you have to go in and create a pivot chart. So I'm going to make another video just to walk through that on a Mac, because I realize now that created confusion, and I honestly didn't know about that difference. But now that I'm in Windows, what I'm going to do is I can just simply click and drag over all of these columns. And now you could just keep on dragging down until you get all of them. And that works. And it's not bad when you have 100 rows. But when you have 5,000 rows, and believe me, people have spreadsheets that have 5,000 rows of sales data or whatever. It's easy to do. You don't want to do that. That's going to take forever. And realistically, most things in Excel shouldn't take any longer whether you have 5,000 rows or 500, besides certain summary statistics like calculating the mode particularly takes a hot minute. And that's just knowing how to use Excel a little bit, like some of the shortcuts. And so with this, if we just select everything over here, and we don't even have to do that, I can press Control Shift right arrow key, and look, it selects until it finds a blank cell. And so I can just press Control Shift right arrow key or Command Shift right arrow key on your Mac, and that's selected everything in the first row. Now watch this. I'm going to press Control Shift down arrow key, and now I've selected all the data here. So now I can insert a pivot chart with all of this. Whenever I create a pivot chart, I go ahead and throw in all of my data by default, because the whole point of a pivot chart is it lets you pick and choose which values you want to include and how. So if I don't like what I got, I can kind of change it and I don't have to import new data. Before I do that, what I want to do is actually format this as a table. This is optional, but I like to do that so I can sort my table. I like to have a good overall data view. So there are sort options here. I like a table because then I can sort and filter by row or by column and row. So what I can do is I can go home, and right here in the middle, I have format as table. Check my table as headers. That's the top row. Click OK. And now I can filter by each column. Now I see some data that's screwed up here. And that's kind of the reason I do this, because I already noticed there was a screwed up data when I did this release year calculation. So let's sort this A to Z. So because it's text, instead of sorting numerically, it says sort A to Z. And that's fine. We can keep it as text. Now, 1905, 2013, what went wrong here? Well, the text formula behaved differently because these 4 values only had the year over on the left-hand side. And I'm not exactly sure why these are the results. 1905 seems to be a default, right? Because no matter what the input is, that's the result, the output. So I'm thinking maybe that's like a start date that it returns if it can't do the conversion. So how do we fix this? Well, I got a simple idea. If we're saying, okay, the exact date doesn't matter to me, let's just make this into a date first. That didn't format right. Let's see what data format we're dealing with here. General, let's make this text. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify this. Let's see what this data type is. Oh, this is being treated as a date. So let's modify this. I'm going to make this 1/1/2013. Oops, screwed that up a little bit. I'm going to make this 1/1/2012. 1/1/2013. And let's do 1/1/2011. What happened with this one? I screwed it up. So now look at that. We got what we want. And if I want to make this consistent with the others, let's go ahead and convert this from text to the date type. I guess short date is fine. And actually, it's interesting. It doesn't look the same because that's on the left-hand side. I'm not sure exactly. I know I'm getting the right derived value. I'm going to select down this whole column, Control-Shift down, and I'm going to format these all by the same date format. Okay, I guess this is just right aligning that. There we go. Now at least know they're consistent. And now let's try sorting this again. So let's see what data type we're dealing with. Date, 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 date. Okay. Let's try sorting A to Z. And now our sorting seems to be working. I don't see any 1905. So we're good. Perfect. Little data cleaning there. Didn't expect it, but there it was. Now let's go back to our instructions and check on these. So I'm going to find a few trends, and I'm going to start by now creating that pivot chart. Another reason I like to create a table before I make my pivot chart is because now when I go to insert a pivot chart, all I have to do is go to insert. I click pivot chart here, and see how it says table 1? It goes ahead and selects all the data. I'm going to let it go to a new worksheet. And now what we have here is we have our chart here. And this is what you have to manually create on your Mac. You have to actually create the pivot chart from your pivot field list. So I'll make a separate video to show how that's done. But let's go ahead and let's add some stuff to this chart. By the way, let's say this tab is closed. How do I get it? Click on this chart area here. And then click on field list. And then you'll get to see everything. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take popularity category. Put it on the axis. And let's put release year. Well, let's see. let's take, what do we want to look at? Popularity. Maybe popularity by category. And I can see that most are low to medium. What if we looked at these instead of a column chart? Let's go click on the chart, click design, and let's change it to a pie. Because this is just one variable, so I should be able to just see these as parts of a whole. And now I see that based on Kendrick's singles, only a small slice, small percentage is represented as high. Now, this isn't very meaningful yet, so let's give this a title. Popularity of Kendrick singles. Now, I'm going to click on this chart once, and that's selecting kind of all the slices. If you double click on one, you'll select only that slice. You click off of it and start over. Now do a single click, right click, and say add, right click, and say add data labels. Now I have 148581. Let's right click this and let's say format data labels. And instead of value, let's show for sales. Very nice. So what that tells me is only a small percentage are high. Most fall in the medium to low. Okay. Now I might be able to use this in comparison later to see, okay, when did most of these high popularity songs occur? Let's see if we can figure that out. Popularity by category. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this. I'm going to say move or copy, and I am just going to copy this sheet. Now, keep in mind, everything I'm showing you here, these are just me. I'm finding some charts to give you ideas to work with. You are by no means limited to what I'm showing you. So I've given you several kind of ideas here. I just need you to create 2 different charts. Okay. Looks like I need to change this. This should say are 2 different appropriate charts created, not 3. Yeah, so I'll update those instructions, but I'm just giving you some ideas to work with here. I don't think this one I just created itself gives me a very good picture of Kendrick's career over time, but it is an important trend that we may be able to connect with other trends to figure that out. So let's rename this. I'm going to name this popularity over popularity by year, let's say. And now I'm going to start changing some values. So let's go back. I clicked my chart area. I'm going to click PivotChart Analyze, click Field List twice, and now I get the list again. And now I'm going to completely change everything. So no more popularity category. Let's take popularity, the number, put that in let's just start by putting in the values. And pie chart's not working out for us. So let's go ahead and change this to a column. And let's divide this by time. So here's release year. And now what did I say about best practices, the do's and don'ts? I said never put time on the y-axis. So what we don't want is that. That's horrible. Like, what am I looking at here? What we do want is something more like this. Now, this is dangerous, this trend that we're showing, because it looks like in 2010, like nothing, right? And it looks like in 2018, we see lots of variance here. But look what this says down here in values. It says sum of popularity. So obviously in years where more singles were created, if we're summing the totals, then some years are going to appear like we're way more popular, right? And that's why this scale doesn't match our system from 0 to 100, right? It's all the way up to 800 because they're just adding these up. So we have to change this. How do we do it? Well, we click on the value and then we find value field settings. We click on that and we change it from sum to, in this case, average would be more appropriate for finding our actual trend, right? That's what we want to know. And now we get a totally different picture. And we can see there is variance in popularity over a year, but it's not as drastic. And look at this huge spike in the year 2024. So what I'm showing, this is okay as a bar chart, but it's not really the right use of a bar. It's a suboptimal use because I don't really need to compare exact quantities to each other. And this is a lot of bars to look at. What I really want to see is the shape. I'm looking for changes over time. And so you can imagine me drawing a line over the tops of these, right? Then you can kind of imagine what that shape looks like. So what I'm dancing around is this should be a line chart. Let's make it as such. So now look at that. Much clearer picture of what's going on, much clearer trend. So what I can infer from this is that most of the high popularity singles occurred. I have to click over here to find that. You can scroll through your different sheets with these arrows, but it looks like most of those high popularity singles occurred during this 2023 and 2024 period. So you can see how these together are giving me a fuller picture of Kendrick Lamar's career in singles, in terms of singles. What are some other trends you could find in this? Well, we do have more specific data like release date for most of it. We also have things like danceability. I wonder if there's a relationship between tempo and popularity or danceability and popularity. You want to find out? Let's find out. Like I would imagine, my guess is that the high energy singles are more popular. Now keep in mind, our whole set here, this is not Kendrick's entire discography. This is only singles. So that might actually be harder to find than you think. So those are just some other ideas of trends you can look for. And then the end goal is to start to build a picture of Kendrick's career. So let's check off what we've done up to this point. We've brainstormed some trends that we've looked for them. I've definitely found one trend that I can use to tell me the story, and that's the popularity per over year. And maybe I'll say by year here. And again, it would be better if you label your axis. So I need to practice what I preach. So we can go to Format, or Design rather, click on Add Chart Element and add those titles. This is year, and this is popularity over here, just to make it more clear. But I know right ahead that this is going to tell me valuable information about Kendrick's career as characterized by these singles. Let's go ahead and do that just so you can't say I didn't. PivotChart, let's go to Design, Titles, Vertical, Popularity. Control B, bold it, let's make it bigger. And there we are. So once I start to research Kendrick, okay, and that's going to be a part of this is the research aspect. Now I have this. What was going on in 2022? Maybe he just wasn't producing a lot of singles by volume, and the ones that were coming out, their average wasn't popular. Looks like he was kind of sleeping on us, or we were sleeping on Kendrick in 2020. Either he wasn't producing or we weren't paying attention, right? So you can look at the volume and see how many singles, but we know this is average, so the average popularity is low. Versus times like 2018, what was happening in 2018? Well, I'm glad you asked. So the next part of this is to create your report. You're going to tell a story, and you can make some inferences, but they need to be based on your data and based on what was actually going on in his career at that point in time that you're talking about. Whoops. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to show you how to do this in PowerPoint. So I can just right click on a chart. I can say copy, and I've started this PowerPoint. I just went and selected one of the Microsoft themes, so I didn't have to start from scratch. And let's just create a blank slide, and I'll show you how you can do this. So let's call this popularity over the years, maybe. Make that smaller, bump that up. And watch what happens if I just press Control V or Command V. I can just paste my chart. I didn't want to paste it inside the text. Let me click outside. There we go. And see how it just pastes your exact chart with the title clear. My axis titles are clear. And it's very visible already. It looks great. And it will automatically usually adapt to your slide themes with the colors it uses. So now what could make this better? Well, this transparency is not doing me any favors on readability. So let's go ahead and go to chart design here, and we can choose different colors there. But what I want to do is go to format and fill in a solid background color. so that now we're not getting overlap. And then what I also want to do is maybe give it a little outline. I think you can even crop these to a shape maybe. No, that didn't work. Let's see. I thought you could. Maybe I'm crazy. Okay, but that looks pretty good. It's readable. That's the most important thing. That's what I care about. And let's scoot over our text box and let's actually start to describe this. Well, I didn't want to waste your time on the video, so I already did this right here to give you an example. I'm going to delete this because this is my better chart. So I talked about the full picture of what's going on. So I went and I looked up what was going on at different points in his career. And I see that he had a mixtape going on in 2010. This period, it looks like he's kind of a no-name at this point. He's more underground. He's growing, right? He's a newer artist. I know he got mad popular, Mad City. He got mad popular in this period. The first time I ever heard him was when I heard a certain word, Don't Kill My Vibe, right? That was the first song I ever heard by him because they played it on the radio to death. And I was like, who is this guy all of a sudden? It was like he came out of nowhere around this era, right? And hits like this were also huge. Poetic Justice was a big one. And so we see his popularity is on the rise. And then in 2015, we had a drop off. Well, what happened there? Well, this is before To Pimp a Butterfly. We know that one was a huge hit in his career. But some of the singles we see that were coming out then, not his more popular ones. All Right ended up being super big, interestingly. But I guess it wasn't an immediate hit. Now, look at what happened in 2016 through 18. This is considered sort of his magnum opus by some. I've actually read or seen a video. This will tell you, I guess, how much of a nerd I am, but I saw a video where his parents are actually divided, where his dad thinks that To Pimp a Butterfly was his best album, and his mom thinks that Damn was. I have to agree with his mom. And he does too. He agrees with his mom. I think that was his best album. And that one did really well, right? But then nothing compares to this surge in popularity. So, I've given you a lot that for context here, but this is really research that I want you to kind of do. But I'm not telling you, what's happening here. This is a major trend that needs to be explained. That's one thing. And that's what you kind of want to do with each of those two charts, whatever you include in your report. You want to really explain how that fits in and explains what was going on with his career. All right. So you're going to create that. You're going to parse it together into one PowerPoint or one Word document. And don't just give us a chart and no explanation. The story is what we're after here. Right. And so you can see how you're being graded at the end here. Do you have those two columns? Do you have those calculations? Is the data, have you been able to use it? If it's a mess, that's not going to work, right? Do your charts actually show meaningful trends? Are we doing things like people don't notice that they're giving totals when they should be showing the averages, right? If I showed you the total popularity by year, that would not be a meaningful trend, because then on the years where he produced more singles, popularity would be higher because we're just adding, right? And then the formatting. Can I look at your chart and clearly understand it? Well, does it have clear labels? Do I know what's on this axis and that, right? These are all things that matter. And then the quality overall. So these are what we're looking for. We understand you're new to this. We're just looking for a good faith attempt to really dive in, to really do some research into his career and try to match that with your trends to let us know what's going on. All right. So we'll be in the chat. We'll be in the CSCI 1100 email. I'll be out for a few days this week, so I might not be as responsive, but that's why that email is a shared email and why we have the chat. So I hope that gives you a good starting point for this lab.